101. I'm like a college student just entering college. And in the freshman year, and I'm going to take 101. See what happens at 101. My name is Leonard Gyles, PFC. I was in 17 months, and I was in the Company L, 271st Regiment, 69th Division of 1st Army. Sam called me. I was drafted. Camp Lucky Strike, and that's when we were assigned to our company and division. I was assigned to Company L, 271st, 69th Division, 1st Army. My commanding officer was Captain Davison from Detroit. Well, I'll tell you, he was a real nice guy to be with. He was very thoughtful of all of his troop. I think he'd do most anything for his troop, really. Yeah, well, I got the Purple Heart the 6th of April in Bristol, England, 115th General Hospital. And I got the Combat Infantry Badge. I got that at Percy Jones in 28th of August, 1945. They gave me the Bronze Star. I was entitled to the Bronze Star because I had the Combat Infantry Badge. This actually was the 6th battle that was in. Oh, I know what it was. I was a volunteer for the scouting patrol that came from Lucky Strike after we was appointed. And nobody volunteered, and I did. My dad always told us children, if you do a job, do it to the best ability or don't do it at all. So nobody volunteered, so I did. And the two fellows that were like biological buddies when we was in basic took on with me. And we would go scout the towns before the company and go back and report it to our company commander, and then they would move accordingly. And then the last one, where I got the Combat Infantry Badge, was Cease and Ed and I, we scaled a little mound in front of us, ridge in front of us, but it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, 0800 in the morning, and we got behind the ridge and we could see the town. And there was a church, where two churches that were on the inside of the outlet streets that led off Main Street. They had mortars on both sides of the churches, in front and in between. And they had some artillery guns. I think there was 4. And so after we observed that, I went back and reported to the company commander, which was a command post at that for Company K, L, and M. And I made the decision. We never shelled churches. And I made the decision we should shell the church. And she said to me, we don't shell churches. And I said, we're going to this one. And Ed said, it was in my group for observing. He said, I don't believe it. So we went back command post and told Captain Davison that we were going to shell the churches, and he couldn't believe it. And I said, well, if we don't, we're outnumbered and we're going to lose the battle. So I figured from what mortars we could see around those churches, they had at least a company more than we had. And I was also, when I had a voice in what to do, the artillery was also in that. So I had 3 companies in an artillery company. So I came down and I told the captain about what it was, and I told him about the number of mortars we had, and they were going to start firing at 8:30 in the morning, and I said, we got to get the jump on them, and if we don't, we'll lose the battle. So he gave me the decision, let me make that decision, in which I did, and we called for the artillery to start at 0825, in which they did, and the first 4 shots blew up both churches, which took a lot of the Germans out because there was riflemen in the churches concealed as well as there was for the mortars. And then about this part, I was told, it was about 11 o'clock, I was injured, and we could hear the shells dropping closer and closer, and I and 2 fellows dove into a shell crater, we got into the shell crater, and we didn't hear this one, and that's the one where I got wounded. So I went out, got up and went to the captain and had to call medics. And luckily, and I think God worked this way, because Cease and Ed was there, we were close together. They took me to a little ravine, and with sulfur powder and some compression pads, and took care of me. And about 2 hours later, the fellow came out from headquarters and wanted to know how it was going. And Cease and Ed told him, but I wasn't conscious part of the time. So they told him, and he also told him that the 2 fellows that was in the crater with me were both killed. And then later on, it was like 3 o'clock, they said a chaplain and the medics came in the chaplain's Jeep. They picked me up, put me on a litter, put me on the back of the car, of the Jeep, and drove me out across this open field that was kind of rough, and they didn't come sooner because the enemy was strafing that to keep companies from coming in. Stay on that litter so I didn't fall off. On the way out, the flag was shot off in the chaplain's Jeep. And the next thing I knew, woke up to knowing a medic asked the chaplain how much further we had to go. He said about a mile, and that took me to a MASH unit. So then the next morning I woke up, and they divided off the back of the unit, MASH unit, with curtains. One side I was at, and they put white sheets up around my bed, and pretty soon I heard voices. And they came in and talked to me a little bit, and I had 3 drain tubes from my body into jugs, and I asked them about it, and they said, well, you've had 4 parts of your inner body has been injured, which was I had a kidney removed, the bladder was repaired, and a tube came from that to a jug, and they put a tube in my lungs in case I would draw moisture, and they didn't want the fluid in my lung. They also had a drain tube in my body because you create moisture after operations. And a few days later, they put me out in the ward, and I was there 13 days. And then in the 13 days, they took me by ambulance to a SS Panther barracks that was converted to an American hospital. I was there, I think, 3 days, 2 or 3 days, I can't remember for sure. So then the ambulance, they took me to an airstrip in Belgium and airlifted me to Bristol, England, the 117th General. There they got there, they dressed my wounds and took the loose skin off of my back so that new tissue could grow. And I was going to try to write, and I had a broken right arm, and was going to try to write a letter to my wife left-handed, and a Red Cross person came along and wrote the letter for me. And she wanted to know if there's anybody else in the area that she could write. And I said, yes, I have a brother over here, he's in the Coast Guards, but I don't know where he's at. I didn't even know his address, but they found it. A few days later, here he walks in. That's the first time in 14 months we'd seen each other. Then they moved the bunks down and put a bunk right next to mine, right tight to mine, and he was there about a week. He signed payroll for me, and I said to him, Lloyd, if you keep on signing payroll, I'm going to owe the government. That's when I found out I had made PFC earlier on. I made PFC in 6 months' time. So then I had all my pay for 3 months plus in that. And then he left, and the 21st of April, we boarded ship, hospital ship, to come to the States. We sailed on the 22nd, and when we was out at sea about the 3rd day or 4th day, we were into a severe storm. They idled engines, and we sat there 2 days with idle engines. Finally, they started up, and we came to the States. And best thing you ever see is that old lady standing on that Ellis Island. That's a great sight to see. Then we went to Jersey Harbor and we unloaded at went to Camp Kilmer. And there they redressed the wounds, took off scar tissue. And a few days later, well, that's when they signed the armistice with Europe. And I got my World War II medal there. Then they transferred me to Cambridge, Ohio, to Fletcher's General, which is a neurosurgeon hospital. Come to see me. And then 11th of June, I was transferred to Percy Jones. And I was at Percy Jones from then until I was discharged. And I was discharged the 5th of December. And I always said that I'm going to go to heaven because I've been through hell twice. Because I was through the war and all of the months it took to heal my wounds. I was 23. And I couldn't imagine being 23 years old, having control of 3 companies and an armored division, or artillery division. I don't remember the towns, I just remember what took place in the towns. Cecil Fisk and Ed Fielding. Cecil Fisk lived at Trufant, Michigan here, in Michigan. And Ed lived in Royal Oak. Oh, I took my basic training at Camp Wheeler, Georgia, at Macon, Georgia. And when we were, well, we went to Fort Sheridan and got our shots and got our part of our military uniform. Then we went from there to Camp Wheeler, Georgia, at Macon. And that's where Ed, Cease, and I became very close friends when they assigned us bunks. Ed's was bunk 11, Cease 12, mine was 13, and I was appointed a temporary squad leader. Then we went from there. We did our basics. We got the rest of our uniforms. Then the following week, we were assigned our guns and loaded with cosmoline that you had to clean off. And that's where we did our target shooting. And then in October, my wife came down and with a friend that went with me from Leslie. He was in Company C and I was in Company A. And our wives, we knew this couple at home. We spent a lot of time with them. So the 2 gals came down, we spent a weekend together. And then after they left, we began to get more intense training because we went to Europe after 11 weeks training. They transported us from Camp Wheeler to Marietta, Georgia, to Robbins Air Force Base to fly us home. And the lieutenant that was in charge of the C-47 we was going to fly home in was a Michigander also. And there was a number of them aboard it. So for 2 days we were grounded because of fog, and he was upset because he came from the Aleutian Islands, and he said he flew in fog worse than that. And on the 3rd day, after lunch, he said, if you boys want to go home, hop in. And we was at the end of the runway where it worked just right because he could taxi out on the runway and take off. And we flew into Romulus, which is Detroit Metro. Then on the way home, they had a bus waiting for us, and on the way home, they kept dropping the guys off that lived along the highway. It was 12 at that time, and we got into Lansing in time to catch the last bus that went to Jackson, which went through Leslie. And I got off downtown, and I don't know why, but I got off downtown and where the bus usually stops and picks up passengers and lets passengers out. Then I walked 2 blocks home, and the railroad track crossed just 2 houses from me on 127, where I could have got off and been closer to home. But I spent Christmas at home. The last Christmas at home before I went overseas. Well, my brother's wife was there. He was in the Coast Guards. My brother's wife was there, and my wife and I and the little girls and my mother and father. My mother put on the Christmas dinner for us. Anyhow, we went back and, well, we went to Fort Meade, and we had to be there before midnight or before 12:01 a.m. of January 1, 45. And we met at Fort Meade, Maryland. And then we went from there after they organized and recouped and briefed and whatnot. We went to Miles Standish, Camp Miles Standish in Massachusetts. Then we went from there to the harbor, Boston Harbor. We got there the 7th. We boarded ship. It was the Isle de France, which was a French tourist ship converted to a troop ship. And then we went aboard. Of course, being the first squad, we got dining room detail all the way across the ocean. And that's when this fellow in charge of the dining room told us we was going to go where he get a wee nip, you know. So we sailed the 8th of January for overseas. We 7 days sailing. Well, we went directly from boat to train, boarded train, and then we went to Southampton, England. We didn't spend much time in Scotland. More about combat infantry badge. I looked up the info on it, and I talked with the secretary of the Combat Infantry Association, and he told me that in ground troops there's 2.6 million ground troops from 41 through Desert Storm, Gulf War, 20-year war, Nam, and Korea. And out of that 2.6 million, there's 3,033 that hold the badge. That's quite an odd. Combat infantry badge, well, I'll tell you a little bit about it. General George Mitchell in the early 40s wanted to have a ground troop be honored for above and beyond the call of duty. So he came up with the combat infantry badge. World War I to beginning of 1940s, they had what they called the fighter's badge. And if you walked into the area where the combat was and get somebody to vouch for you, you could claim that badge. And Mitchell didn't want that done. He wanted it just for the person himself. The blue is because of the blue for the infantry color. The braid on your cap is blue, and their other colors are blue. That's why they call it the blue badge. And having earned that, he's given me entitled to the Bronze Star. I have the Purple Heart, and this is from the Battle of the Bulge. And gotta see what I got here. And the ETO is the European Theater Operation. Then I have the Good Conduct Medal, and then I have the badges down here for sharpshooter, for rifle range, for the 30 caliber water machine gun and the carbine. The European Theater got a bronze battle star, and that is also the bronze battle star that goes with the Battle of the Bulge here. Yeah, that's a discharge. When you got your discharge, you got a ruptured duck. This is the First Army. This is the original one that I was given. We were given 2 of these to begin with. We used to sew them on our jackets, be on there a couple days or so, and we have to move and they want your patches taken off. But this is the only one I saved out of the 2. This one is the 69th Division. It has the red 6 and the blue 9. PFC. The Bronze Star. It was published in the paper, our community paper, Eaton County. And Senator Patty Burkholz was senator for Eaton County. She had her secretaries call and wanted to know if I wanted to have General Taylor award me my Bronze Star. And I said, no, I don't think so. They called the second time, and the wife says to me, you don't have answer that. And I said, no, I never told you what I done in the war. The only thing you know is Cecil Fisk and Ed Fielding's name. So they called the third time. And I said to the secretary, I'll tell you. You ask the question. If I want to answer it, I'll answer it. If not, I won't. So then they set it up, and they had a big ceremony for me at the Department of Veterans Affairs when they were in the large building on South Washington Street. The Brigadier General Robert Taylor that gave it to me. Then there's two other generals. There was about 50 family and friends. And the most thing that really got me choked up was they had a full company of men and women in the background, which really made the day. But then when I got the Bronze Star, I got that was 58 and a half years after I was discharged. So everything came, but came late. Medical records, St. Louis, Missouri, they had a fire in '76, and part of the records were destroyed. And they had sent them to NASA, those that were waterlogged, and NASA dried them out, and I think that's how they come to find out that I had the Combat Infantry Badge and should be awarded the Bronze Star. So I think that's it. But it took, when I got notification of it, it took almost 2 weeks from when I was told about it, and they sent it from Philadelphia till it got to Eaton Rapids. I think it took about 2 weeks for it to get there. I worked for Hinckley Myers here in Jackson. I was a sheet metal pattern maker and a sample builder. Then I went into the war, and when I came back, I went back to work for, it had become Kent Moore at that time. So I went back to work at Kent Moore, and I got back my old job because they were making merchandising cabinets for General Motors in the garage for their tools. And later on, during the Korean War, they brought some chuckers, and I was in charge of tooling those up and running those. Then I made supervisor, and I was supervisor for 9 years. I had 18 years in at Kent Moore, and I quit and went to barber college, and I retired as a barber. When I got to Percy Jones, I went to the neurosurgery holding ward, so they knew whether it was a lower limb, upper limb, or what, for neurosurgery. And in this ward, there was 8 of us. And one of them was Bob Dole. The other one was Iona from Hawaii. Both became senators. The building is now named after them. Bob Dole was a second lieutenant in a mountain group in Italy. And I don't remember what Iona had. But now that building is named after them. And I got out of there in December the 5th of '45. From April, I was discharged in 5th of December, and months after that, I don't know how many months after that, I was still healing because the ulnar nerve in my right arm hadn't completely grown, and this past half here was white. And when I worked in the factory, I'd get oily, greasy hand, somewhat greasy. This would be greasy, this would be snow white. It never collected any moisture or any oil or anything. But I was months afterwards recouping. So that's why I say that I was going to go to heaven, because I've been through hell twice. It took so long to heal, and I was in the war. knock came on our door, and the wife went and answered the door, and I was in the kitchen, and I heard the voice, and it was Cecil and Ed. They would come to give condolence to Marie because they heard that I had passed away. And what they did, they got discharged from Fort Custer. As you know, they discharge you from the closest place. They rented a car, Fort Custer, Battle Creek. They came to Leslie to talk to Marie. And then when they saw me, great reunion. Then they left and went to Lansing, and Ed drove the train, took the train to Royal Oak, and Cease drove the car to his hometown and turned it in. But anyway, Marie and I had taken, I call her Mom most of the time because I wanted the girls to remember her as Mom, not as Marie, as when I was talking and confusing them when they were small. So Mom and I went 5 years in a row to try to find Cecil. And we never did find Cecil. So here a while ago, I was taking the loose leaf stuff I had collected out of my military book and put it in a 3-ring notebook. And this was on a Monday, and I went to the phone and I called Marilyn, and I said, Marilyn, see if you can find anything on Cecil and anything on Ed. She does genealogy, so she knows how to look up some of this stuff. So the first thing she does is go to death notices. It came up that Ed had passed away in 1999. Then it came up at Cease. She got the full, complete obituary of him and his picture. And so that kind of got me excited. And the fellow says to me, are you Leonard Gyles? And I said, yes. He said, I know who you are, but you don't know who I am. And I said, well, who are you? He said, I'm Randy Fisk. And I said, the only Fisk I knew was Cecil. And that was his father, 75 and a half years later. We met last year at the Saturday before Father's Day. And their son, Kevin, was in Berlin, Germany on business. And he had gotten on the computer where his grandpa had went from town to town to town. He rented a car and he took in all of these towns. And I said to him, you know, Kevin, they left off the first 2 months of your grandfather's overseas duty. So then I told him what it was all about. So then I sat down and I typed up and mailed them the info that they had. So then in October last year, I had an extra set of medals, and I thought to myself, they probably will never look for his medals or go to military records or anything. So I knew what the company would be awarded, of which I had. So I took those and put them in a shadow box, and I took them over to their house in Gowan, Michigan, and gave it to the family so that they'd have their father's and grandfather's medals. And they did that with what they call the Patriot Riders. It's a motorcycle group that works with this kind of stuff. And they made me, can't remember her name, she made me the most beautiful quilt you ever seen. And then I gave that to them, or to Randy, and we're going to try to get back with him again here pretty soon. The honor flight is a flight that is given from the headquarters is in Portage, Michigan. And it's what it is. This honor flight is those that came home by ship or something that they didn't have a victory celebration for them. Okay. The day Marilyn and I went, we left from Kalamazoo, which is Kalamazoo Battle Creek International Airport now. And going in on the left-hand side, there was all kinds of police officers, from the constable to the city officers, the sheriffs, state police. On the right-hand side, they had personnel from Fort Custer They had the colors, and then we went in the back room. We had a mini breakfast, and we boarded the aircraft. And we flew to Ronald Reagan in Washington, D.C. airport. There we boarded a bus, and we had the tour of Washington with police escort. Everywhere we went, we had police escort. And they took us through a lot downtown and showed us a lot of the buildings, the Department of Interior, and where the big general's offices are, and IRS, and all of those. But we spent a full day touring different things down there. In the afternoon, Robert Dole came there, but we had left just before lunchtime. And if I'd known he was going to come there, I'd have skipped that bus and caught another one and talked to him. But I never did get to talk to him after that. But I'd like to talk to him because Robert Dole, as you probably know, he was behind the construction of the World War II Memorial. We got back. I don't remember now what time it was. Must have been about 7:30, 8 o'clock. But we went to the Portage High School, and the Marshall newspaper the next day said that there was 3,700 greeted our flight. And we walked through the school hall, down, 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 down. And there's anywhere from little children to adults that congratulated us. It was a really, really a nice day. Really a nice day. I weighed 148 pounds when I got out of the military. My wife passed away, I weighed 172. After she passed away, I'm now down to 153 pounds. So this is the same uniform that I had when I was discharged. I was discharged with the ODs, but where we lived, I built in a cedar clothes closet in the basement. And you know, the mall is like those trousers better than they didn't bother these because I was issued both summer and winter issue when I was discharged. And I was discharged from Fort Custer. I had 13 pieces of shrapnel removed from my body. I had a broken arm and 4 intestinal, as I said before. And the 5th one was in the thigh of my leg, and they probed for it, and they couldn't get it. 5 years later, our family physician took it out. So I had 13 pieces of shrapnel. Anywhere from the last one they took out was about a 1/2 inch square, up to the size of a $50. But I had a lot of 13s. That was 13 in squad. If you add the middle initial to my name, I got 13 letters. I had 13 pieces of shrapnel removed. So I had a lot of 13s through the Army. Days I went to work, I shouldn't have because I didn't feel good, but at least I went to work and took care of my family. I had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My oldest boy is a retired lieutenant commander from the Navy. He flew Tomcats off the aircraft carrier. I've ridden on 4 carriers on shakedown crews. I rode the Theodore Roosevelt 4 days and 3 nights. Pax River, that was test pilot. He did that for 1 year. When they went from the S-2 trackers, piston jobs, to the S-3 jets, they dropped Sonny boys to track submarines. And he was naval justice for a year. He's had quite a career. Then I have a grandson that was in the 82nd Airborne. He did 62 jumps. Wouldn't be a conscientious objector in no way. You learned a lot. You learned discipline, which I had discipline. My father and mother was quite disciplined with us children. I mean, I don't mean there's brutality there or anything like that, but they taught us right from wrong. But I would go again if I was of age and was AV. I belonged to DAV, and I don't belong to American Legion, but I contribute to them annually, and the VFW, I contribute to them annually. But we started when I was at Percy Jones, Bill Durfee was out of the service and he proxied for me. We started VFW post in Leslie, but we never could get enough people to make it go. So that's my experience of joining the VFW, but I make donation every year because they need it. And I'm telling you, if you're called to support your country, take the and serve for your country, because after all, you're going to live there and suffer cancer to the cave or something.